Welcome to the Boswell Virtual Event Series. It is day 4,767 of us being in business. And it is an honor to welcome back to Boswell, this time virtually, Mary Helen Stefaniak for her new novel, The World of Pondside. The book has just come out. If I can show you, it's just a beautiful book. This for you people who sometimes read ebooks or download and sometimes read books in person, I just want to say Blackstone does a spectacular job. Beautiful end papers, a beautiful cover inside, very fine paper. This book's going to last when the rest of your books are all yellowed and the insides are just as good as the outsides. If I may quote from another former Milwaukeean, Pete Fromm, I devoured The World of Pondside cover to cover. There is no way to stop. A mystery pulls us in and carries us, while Stefaniak turns us this way and that, peeling back layers, giving us a view of life in a nursing home that we've never seen this close and this personally. Engaging and perfectly phrased in a comic voice, it'll shake you to the core. Mary Helen Stefaniak is also the author of Self-Storage and Other Stories, and The Cailiffs of Baghdad, Georgia, which won the 2011 Anisfield Wolf Book Award for Fiction. And I can tell the person who edited this bio does not know that was not from here because they did not mention The Turk of My Mother, which is set in Milwaukee. Professor Emerita of Creative Writing at Creighton University. She teaches fiction at the MFA program at Pacific University and the International Summer School at Renmin University in Beijing. And may I say, speaking of Pacific University, as I mentioned, one of our favorite conversation partners, Valerie Laken, who also teaches at Pacific University, but her day job is Associate Professor of English at UWM. She is the author of the story collection Separate Kingdoms and the novel Dream House. And let me just say, what an honor to have you both. Yes, I wanted to mention, you can ask questions today in chat or Q&A, say hi in the chat, and I will forward that to our author afterwards. Thank you both for coming. Let's give them a big virtual hand. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Daniel.
Greetings, everybody. I'm happy to see all these friendly names out there. I think the first thing is that Mary Helen is gonna read a little from her book, and then we'll have some questions for her. And I'll have some questions for the first part, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So when it's time, or at any point, you can type questions into the chat or into the Q&A section, and we'll get to them in the last part of this session. And around maybe 7:45 or so, which is our time. I don't know what time zone you guys are in. Anyway, I'll stop talking so that Mary Helen can read from this beautiful book.
Well, thank you, Valerie. And thank you for being here tonight. And thank everyone who's scrolling up through the chat. I'm so happy to not exactly see you all, but I know you're there. So it's a great honor to be able to read to you. I'm going to read just a short, about a 5-minute or a little less passage from the novel. Actually, it's 2 passages, but they both come in under 5 minutes. Zadie Smith says that the novelistic impulse is to leap into another person's life. And I love that. That's exactly what the novelistic impulse is for me. And in this novel, we leap into 5 different characters' lives. So we get the perspective of 5 different characters. And I'm going to read just from one of their points of view. As Daniel said, it is a mystery. It's been a murder mystery, crime novel, and a mystery thriller in different places. And although I do like one Goodreads review that called it a lovely character-driven story with a bit of mystery sprinkled on top. I like that pretty much. It does, though, start with, a couple of bodies being discovered, but that's not where we're going to start. Laverne Slotchek had been hiding in her room since breakfast, not that she had eaten any. Who could eat breakfast with all those red and blue lights zooming along the walls in the dining room and the food service people gawking at the windows, blocking her view instead of feeding screaming Jeannie and the others who moaned more quietly but could not feed themselves? Laverne had gotten a few glimpses of police cars, an ambulance, a fire truck. They always sent a fire truck just in case. She asked a staff member what was going on, but the girl didn't seem to know anything. Or if she did, she wasn't talking. Laverne had given up on getting any more coffee. She removed her clothing protector, which was actually a towel-sized bib, and hot-footed it down the hall toward the library, where she found Dwayne Lotspeak already hunched over the computer in the corner. After cursing her luck loud enough to make Dwayne's narrow shoulders twitch, Laverne had taken a left out of the library and scooted down Hawkeye Lane toward her room. Only one of the 3 donated computers in the library was powerful enough to play the game, although the skinny young fellow who worked in the kitchen intended to upgrade the other 2, he kept saying. The game had been invented by the poor man across the hall who had Lou Gehrig's disease. Robert was his name. Laverne could not begin to imagine how anyone could invent what happened when she clicked the little duck on the computer screen that had the words "World of Pondside" under it. In the world of Pondside, Laverne Slotchek was not a former high school biology teacher, long retired. She was a neuroscientist at the University of California, Berkeley, a member of a team racing against the clock to crack the code that would put the kibosh on Alzheimer's and other dementias once and for all, earning the team a nice pile of money in the process and maybe a free trip to Sweden. Laverne had always wanted to live in the Bay Area ever since she and her long departed husband, Bill, spent their 25th wedding anniversary there more than 30 years ago. Sitting in the upper deck at Candlestick, where they could look right out over the bleachers to the sailboats in the bay, Laverne had been surprised every time she glanced at Bill by how young he looked. He was 57 on their 25th, with his giant's cap settled low and shading his face, turning the yellow tinge of his skin back into a golden tan. His liver was halfway to gone then, although they didn't know it yet. In the world of Pondside, Laverne could see the Golden Gate Bridge from the glass wall of her beautifully decorated condo. She and Bill went to see the Giants play at Candlestick Park, not at Ma Bell or wherever they played now. And the notorious offshore winds were always in the home team's favor. Surely Dwayne Lotspeak was finished with the computer by now. If not, she'd go ahead and ask him to log off and let her have a half hour or so just to tide her over. Laverne poked her head into the hallway. Boysenberry Boulevard was empty of traffic, although there was still some commotion going on at the far end of it, where it opened on the atrium, which is what the brochure called the many-windowed and almost always empty front lounge. It wasn't empty now. Laverne caught a glimpse of reflective tape on the back of a fireman's coat, but everyone's attention was directed at the windows. Nobody was looking down the hallway toward Laverne's room. She followed her walker, which she didn't need, but often used as a kind of rolling handrail, in the opposite direction, letting it lead her past the deserted nurses' station and back down Hawkeye Lane toward the library. The good computer, glory be, was free. Dwayne Lotspeak was nowhere in sight. Laverne eased herself into the easy up, easy down ergonomic chair, her heart already beating faster and her fingertips almost tingling. She took the headphones out of the drawer, surprised that Lotspeak had bothered to put them away, and plugged the cord into the hole before she put them on. She experienced a moment of not exactly panic when she couldn't find the little picture of a yellow duck that opened the world of Pondside. The duck link, they called it. Had Dwayne Lotspeak moved it, or worse, had he stolen it somehow? She turned her head to search the screen with the good side of her brain, and there it was. Laverne maneuvered the mouse to bring the arrow over to the right side of the screen, where somebody had moved the duck link into a row of other little pictures, the camera, the fox, the wastebasket. Finally, she got the arrow to settle on the duck. This took a while of dancing all around it first. Reminding herself to breathe normally, she clicked once and waited for the arrow to become a little hand. So that's the part I'm going to read.
I love it. I love it, Mary Helen. So that's the beginning of the book, right? That's the opening. Or not quite.
No, actually, there's a prologue.
You're
There's
right.
a prologue in which we meet. Actually, Laverne Slachik is one of the two main characters, I would say. Although we leap into 5 persons' lives here, 5 characters. Laverne being one of them. She and Foster Creswick, the young man who works in the kitchen, are the 2 main characters, I would say. He's in his 20s. She's 86.
Yeah, and while you have the book in hand, would you just show everybody how the inside part of the cover has the actual duck on it?
Yes, yes.
Because I think it's so cool. I'm sorry. We're all book nerds here, right?
Yeah,
I
no,
see the
that's
names
good.
in the audience.
That's-
There's a bunch of writers
I'm
and
very
book nerds, and you guys are going to love this when you see it.
yes. I think probably everybody has seen the outside of it. If I take this down, the jacket looks like that, which is lovely. But anyway, under the jacket, I shrieked to find this.
Isn't that so cool? So it's like, this tech, vision of the duck link that represents the video game at the core of this book. It's so fun.
Right.
And I just, while we're talking about the book, I know this is a little bit cheesy, but I just want to say that for anybody who's thinking of getting the book, there's a link in the chat space to how you can buy it through Boswell Books, who are so generously sponsoring this event. For those of you who are not from the Milwaukee area, I have to tell you, this is a legendary bookstore. And you can see a picture of it where Daniel's face was before. Daniel bought this bookstore right in the middle of the recession, the financial collapse of around like 2009-ish or so. And so one of the traditions of the store is that at the start of every event, they say how many days they've been open, because those first couple of years, it just seemed like a crazy time to be starting a new bookstore when all the bookstores in the country were shutting down. And so we're super proud, and it's right in my neighborhood. And it's a huge store that has like 200 some events every year. It's a fantastic, legendary space that I hope all of you will read at some point if you haven't already. So anyway, if you're able to buy the book and you want to, doing it through Boswell is a great way to do it. And Mary Helen's also going to be in town to sign some copies. So I think there's probably like a space in the notes when you make your order that you can say, if you'd like it autographed, you can say that and they'll make that happen one way or another for you. So, and then they'll ship it right to your door. Almost like some other company that will remain nameless, but that we don't need to patronize. So Mary Helen, I think one of the things that I love about this book is that it's such a cool combination of different elements. I mean, it's a mystery. Yeah, it's a comedy. It's like this really thoughtful intellectual dive into the ways that technology and virtual realities interact with our real worlds. And it also kind of offers some really interesting and like moving insight into the ways that your life can still be dramatic and vital to the very last days, no matter how impaired you might be or the people around you might be. And I found all of that just like so moving and such a unique combination. But I was wondering, for people who haven't yet read the book, could you give a kind of like overview, your paragraph, like elevator pitch of what this book is about without spoiling the ending?
Okay, yes. Well, it is a mystery thriller that takes place in a nursing home. Except for the parts that take place somewhere else. There are some, but for the most part, it's in the nursing home. And the nursing home is called Pondside Manor, and because there's a pond next door on the grounds. And it's a place where many of the residents and staff members are playing a personalized video game, virtual reality game, not the kind of virtual reality game where you put goggles on. That would be fatal for most of the residents. No, it's actually technologically, it's not a very fancy game. They're sitting at computers, they're using the keyboard, they're using the mouse, they're using the speakers, and the microphone. But they're also using their imaginations. And so when we do enter the game, we enter it through the perspectives of one of these characters and experience it the way they do. And then sometimes we might just see them sitting at the computer from someone else's point of view. But anyway, what have I don't know. That's most of it. Well, the thing is, what else should I tell them, Valerie?
Maybe I think, since we learned this in the first like 10 or 20 pages anyway, do you want to talk a little bit about the mystery at the core of it, or the death at the core of it? or not?
Okay, sure. It actually, you kind of find out on page 5 that somebody's dead anyway, and then you find out who it is. And the person, a person who's found drowned in the pond, strapped into his wheelchair, is the creator of the game, and one of the residents. His name is Robert Kalman. He's an Iraqi veteran, not an old man, but a man who was in the very advanced stages of ALS, and which Laverne calls Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a progressive, degenerative nerve disease that ends finally in total paralysis and death. So that's that. But Robert, anyway, is found in the pond, and then that's bad enough, but it turns out they can't get back in the game. I mean, we left Laverne waiting for the arrow to become a little hand at the end of what I wrote, but it's not gonna, I mean, it's not going to get her into the game. She's going to find out she can't get in, and everyone's going to find out they can't get in. So they have this 2 goals, really. The mystery involves what happened to Robert, and and how can we get back in the game. And then there's actually some other kind of twisty things after that, but I think that really is the main thing that pulls everybody together, from the 80-year-old to the 20-year-old, to the CNA who's still in high school. Actually, none of them are still in high school, but still in college.
Yeah, cool. That's great. That's perfect. So what was the inspiration? Like, what was the first thing that started you thinking about or writing this book?
Well, it was 2 things. It was one thing was that my mother had to go into a nursing home, and and the other is that I met Foster Kresowick, the young man who works in the kitchen. That wasn't his name. But I met him in real life. My mother, I didn't want to go into the nursing home, and was pretty rambunctious. She's a pretty rambunctious lady. There is a character named Mary Mcintyre, one of the residents in the book, who has many things in common with my mother. I wouldn't go so far as to say that she is my mother in the book. She does some things that my mother never did. But in any case, the first day that she was there, she was very upset. She wouldn't eat lunch, she wouldn't eat dinner. And by nighttime, by bedtime, she was very, very hungry. And I was still there with her that day. And so we went in search of food, and because we didn't really have any. And we ended up in the kitchen, finding the kitchen. And there was one young man still working in the kitchen. And, he didn't look like, I don't know, he was young, and he looked like he was sort of mopping things up, not literally mopping things up, but he didn't look like the chef or anything, like the guy who was in charge, not by any means. But we asked him if he could make my mother a sandwich. And he was a little taken aback by that. I don't think that really was his job. So he said, well, what kind of sandwich? And she said, I don't know, a jelly sandwich. And he made her that jelly sandwich, and she ate the whole thing. And that young man's kindness inspired, together with my mother's distress, I guess, and then the people that I met there among the staff and among the residents in the course of my mother's stay there. That's what inspired the story.
Oh, that's great. The book is very tightly setting based. It's very much about this Pondside Manor, and much of the action takes place there. And I loved how well you rendered that setting, and this sort of nursing home in Iowa. I think a lot of people have anxieties or preconceptions about nursing homes. Like, a lot of people, have resistance to them. And also kind of maybe think of them as places where life kind of goes into stasis. And so I was really struck by the way that you make this space seem really vital and dynamic, in part because of that Mary Mcintyre character, who's she recently arrives when the novel starts, and she is kind of a troublemaker and a handful to handle. So I was kind of surprised to hear that your mother was like this, because you're so nice.
Well, she's perfectly nice. It's just
She
she's a
is,
nut.
but she also like tears a shower head off the wall, and
Yeah, that's
it's
the
hard
what
to
my
handle.
mother. My mother didn't do that. When you get to
Okay.
that part, my mother did not tear the shower head off the wall. There are some other things she did that are talked about, but not that.
But so I mean, I'm just trying to say that I love the way that you bring a lot of drama into that space, and it also affords you a lot of cool contrasts between different kinds of characters, and characters that we often kind of overlook. But I was just wondering if you could talk kind of about the advantages and disadvantages as a writer of setting a story in a nursing home, and whether like preconceptions about nursing homes were actively on your mind, and if you were, actively trying to overturn them, or if that just kind of happened naturally.
Well, I mean, one problem with writing a novel set in a nursing home is people say a nursing home, why a nursing home? And but because of my mother and the young guy in the kitchen, I was quite determined to take people into that nursing home and really see how, if you see it through different characters' eyes, what a lively place it really is. If all you do is see people sitting in wheelchairs, not saying much, dozing in front of the television, we've got that happens fairly often in here, but that then you're not inside the life of it and the individual problems that people have, and both in the nursing home and outside the nursing home. I mean, the Foster Creswick who works in the kitchen, one of his big problems is that Robert Coleman, who is now dead, really took him under his wing, and he grew very close to him and learned a lot about computers from him, because Foster helped often he was his fingers, while they were working on the game. So that's another whole big Foster's loneliness. Foster's a guy with a lot of chips on his shoulder, and he kind of measures, he's kind of always waiting to be, well, not always, but he's waiting to be dissed, or, because he's kind of used to that, right? And yet I wanted you to, from seeing the world inside of Foster and also seeing him from other people's perspectives, you know what? I wanted you to, probably shouldn't say this, but I just wanted you to fall in love with Foster. And because he's a guy you would probably sit on the other side of the room from, because he looks pretty stormy, and so I wanted you to fall in love with Foster. And that's really why the mystery came into it, was to give both the residents and the various staff members, certain ones who become more important, a project to work on together that, they were both desperately invested in, to get back into the game and to find out what happened to Robert. So that was, I was the number one requirement for this book was it had to take place in a nursing home. I mean, that was the basics. So, so it wasn't, whatever life came into it comes from the characters.
Yeah, one of the things that I think makes the book really successful is the way that you don't just take up the perspective of the inhabitants of the nursing home, but you also do this really deep dive into the employees of the nursing home at all levels. And you give all different characters' point of view passages. And so as soon as I sort of thought, I mean, like, one of the things that happens in a murder mystery is that the reader has to entertain the possibility all the time that any one of these characters could be the killer. And so there's always this like grain of, you're not supposed to trust them all. You're constantly looking to see, well, which one of these people seems nice, but could be a killer. And of course, with a character like Robert Coleman, some of the time we're wondering whether it might have just been suicide or assisted suicide. So that's an even more complicated mystery to solve. Mm-hmm. But I loved the way that the characters, for instance, there's one character who is the kind of like head administrator of the living space, and she at first seems sort of like unpleasant or self-absorbed, but then you give her these passages where she really comes to life, and we really see what pressures she's under, and she becomes really quite appealing and a little surprising at various points. And each character kind of does that. Even Mary Mcintyre, when she's having her her freakouts, there are also these moments of incredible vulnerability and sweetness that you also tap into. And I was just wondering, I mean, obviously that to me seems like, just a mark of a good writer, finding complexity and humanity in every character. But, sometimes also characters sneak up on us and they surprise us. And we thought they were going to be one way when we started writing the book. And then along the way, we discover something and we go, oh, actually, she's not quite what I thought, or there's more to her than that. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you went about creating these so many different multidimensional characters, weaving them together, and also whether any of them kind of surprised you or took up, ended up coming to life or taking up a bigger space in the book than you originally planned. I know that's kind of a lot of questions. Sorry.
I'm just trying to,
I know, anything you want to talk about is fine.
Well, there are a couple of things I want that come to my mind when you ask that. Surely the characters surprise you. They all surprised me. I wouldn't be writing something if the characters weren't surprising me. Because it would mean that it would mean that the project is not alive for me and that they're not alive, on the page. So yes, they surprised me again and again. Whether they surprised me with, turning out to be more complicated or, having a side that I didn't realize they had, that's a harder question for me. I'm not sure, because I was going to say my answer to the question about the characters was going to be like Flaubert, Madame Bovary, c'est moi. And they're all me, in a sense, they're all me. I mean, I am like Foster. I've got chips on my shoulder, enough to build a house out of. And I'm like the nursing home administrator, who's worried about her wardrobe, although mostly in the world of Pondside, because she's playing the game too, which is great. You have this, woman who's clearly in the wrong job, it seems to me. So right away, my heart goes out to her because she's clearly in the wrong job. And I guess the character who is probably least like a facet of me is the very nice certified nursing assistant, Dakota, because he's such a nice guy and I'm, not that nice. So he's the one who's probably the most different from me. Yeah. So I don't know, did that answer the question?
It does, but I think you're very nice and I've known you for many years now. I don't know. But we'll talk about that some other time. That doesn't have to be out here in the public forum.
No.
Well, one of the things that the novel does that I think is pretty unusual also is it places elderly people and, impaired people, physically and cognitively impaired people, really front and center. And it really, it doesn't just, they're not just minor characters, they are major players in the drama and they're active, they are actively working on this mystery. I was wondering just kind of like what your thoughts are on capturing elderly characters and impaired characters in fiction, both, in terms of why does that matter in culture? Why is it important to do that to you, if it is? And also kind of technically, are there technical challenges to doing that that don't occur to doing that well? Are there technical challenges inherent in capturing an impaired character or an elderly character in a really convincing way and a multidimensional way as a character who has agency and complexity? So could you just talk about kind of why you do it, why it matters, and how you do it so well?
Well, why I do it, I'm glad you used the word agency, because that's kind of what entering the nursing home, the mission for me, the writer, is to kind of argue for the right to be, and the right to do and the right to think for people who sometimes need an advocate in order to be able to do that. People that many are often marginalized. I mean, to use that word, they're all, all the main characters, I guess, except for poor Kitty, the administrator, are well, not all of them are marginalized, but there certainly are plenty of marginalized characters in the novel. And so yes, I think that's very important. And that was also, to make my my mother and the other residents that I met and observed, to make them, to take you inside of them, you know, or to put you inside a character who's now going to interact with them in a way that kind of surprises you. So that was a purpose in writing the novel. It was also very important to me to make it like multi-generational, to have the young and the old. The young main characters are the guy who works in the kitchen, Foster, and then there's the young college student, CNA, and his girlfriend, and so there are the young people involved in the whole getting back into the game and everything that involves, and also in working at the nursing home. So that was very important to me, to have it, to mix it up and show that if you both have something to do together, you know, whether it's solving a mystery or playing a game or getting back in the game, you know, and I like the metaphor of getting back in the game, you know, everybody, but for the old folks especially, but then, you know, that just happens if you don't kind of silo everybody and, you know, make everybody be one thing and not another, that once they have something to work on together, then they become their agents, right? They become free in ways that you would never imagine just looking at them. They really are.
Yeah. It's interesting that like one of the key features of the game is that it's an alternative reality, right? So on some level, it's an escape from their current world. And for some of the elderly characters, it's a return to people that they've lost. Like some of them have, you know, their deceased partners are in the game, and so they can go and see their partners inside the game, who they can no longer see. And so I guess I'm curious about your thoughts on sort of virtual reality and gaming as a form of escape from reality versus, or in combination with, the ways that you also make it have real impact on their real lives, because the mystery can kind of only be solved inside the game, or at least for a while, that's how it seems.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not a big fan of virtual reality with the goggles. You know, I mean, really, where the problem, or what had to be solved, was how to deceive the human visual system into thinking that, you know, things that aren't there are there, which is kind of silly, because that's what our brain does all the time. Is we're never really in touch with anything that's out there. We're always just, you know, inside our brains in many ways. That's all we can experience, you know. But I do think that computer games, video games, are, they can be anything. I mean, just like, you know, they can be addicting and diminishing, or they can be creative and imaginative and skill building, you know, and you know, I'm not talking about, you know, Oregon Trail when you're in grade school. I mean, it was useful, but I'm not talking about teaching history lessons or anything. I was talking about developing your sense of a person who can do. You know, I think if it becomes a matter of you only do in a video game and you don't do outside of it, that seems dangerous. Although, again, I would never assume that that's always a bad thing, because for someone that might be all they can do, you know, is be who they feel themselves to be in the game. And there is that element of their everybody's virtual reality. You're right that they often, especially with the old, with the residents, there's some element from their past, like Laverne's husband Bill, and others have some other persons or situations in the game, but it's never just a return to the past. I mean, Laverne never lived in San Francisco. She never lived in a condo with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, and nor was she a neuroscientist, you know, vying for a Nobel Prize. So she, and that's really the case with all of them. I mean, some of them it's totally imagined. The poor Kitty, the administrator, she who's in the wrong job, she invents a life that she wished she had, you know, but that she doesn't. Now, will she ever have that life? Maybe, you know, I mean, yeah, but she sure hasn't had it yet. And so I thought of the characters in the video games because they get to, I mean, Robert and Foster work with them, and there are parts, you know, in the book that explain a little bit about how this worked, but they gather materials from them. You know, Laverne has a lot of videos and audio cassettes of Bill when he was on the road with the farm team for the Giants. And so they can take that analog and digitize it and then cut it up and make Bill say all sorts of things to her in the world of Pondside. And that same sort of, you know, technology making things like that possible happens in the other portals too. But I feel as though it doesn't just recapture the past. I feel as though it, aside from the places where it literally doesn't recapture the past, where it's totally imagined, I feel as though it allows the characters to go to be in a place and time when they felt, I don't know, that's who they truly are, you know, where they're most truly themselves is, you know, then in the video game, and not who they, you know, so that's where so those are my thoughts. And you wouldn't have that in a video game that wasn't, you know, personally constructed, but, you know, there's a lot of open source stuff now. I mean, you can do, you know, it used to take, you know, a whole studio to, you know, make the hair move on the character, and it's not true anymore. You can buy programs and you could make a very personalized video game if you wanted to.
It's really interesting to me that that both the young characters and the older characters are drawn to these alternate, you know, versions of reality. I mean, I think like in a cheesy kind of black and white version of this, you know, the elderly people would have all these like regrets or nostalgia to go back into a better life that they had when they were younger. But actually, in many ways, the younger people's lives are very sad. Like Foster's life outside of work is when he has practically nothing. He has a bicycle, he has an empty apartment where the electricity keeps getting turned off because he doesn't have any money. He doesn't seem to have any friends or family that he's close with. Like his life is pretty sad. And so he's in the nursing home all the time. And he, you know, it's just interesting to me that like you kind of overturn a lot of our kind of stereotypical notions about who would be happier in that equation, you know, the vital young person who can do anything in life, sort of, or like the Dwayne, is it? Or Dwayne Lotspeak, you know, like he's an amputee, he's elderly, he's in a nursing home, but he seems to have a very active life. He's a firecracker and he dances, he does all these things, you know? And so I just thought I don't really have a question there. I just wanted to say that I found that really interesting. And I guess it sort of leads me into this next question, which is, you know, there's a lot of kind of tragic elements to this book, right? You deal with ALS, with aging, dementia, death, and yet the book is really funny. And I was just wondering, you know, if you could talk a little bit about the role that comedy plays for you when you're writing, and, you know, what you hope to achieve, or how you create comedy in these kind of like darker, I don't know, in this slightly sadder context.
Well, you know, if you try to dissect humor, it's like dissecting a frog, it's dead, right? But you know, mostly you can find the humor in something if you kind of squint and turn your head to one side, you know, and you just see it aslant. I don't know exactly. I couldn't say, how do I put humor into things? It's already there. I mean, I see it and I just write it down. And it comes from when I see, well, maybe it comes from the fact that my overall you know, philosophy of life, well, related to humor anyway, is that we're all in the same boat, right? So that, Helen, and the boat is always sinking, you know, and then so, but at least we're all in the same boat together, you know. So you know, you keep bailing, and what else can you do? So there's a real, you know, strong element. It's funny because there's a real strong element of nihilism in humor, you know, that there's a kind of leveling of value. I mean, there's a place where there's a very tense, it's probably the darkest moment for me anyway in the book, when one of the nursing home residents, who's a lady that never really talks, she walks around with a walker. Her name is Edith Cole, and she has, you know, stuffed animals in her walker, and she only talks to her stuffed animals. She's never, in all the years, and you don't know exactly how long she's been there, she doesn't talk to other people, but she uses her walker to pin Mary Mcintyre's daughter into the sofa in the atrium and gives her a lecture. And one of the things she says about the nursing home is that it's a death sentence. And, you know, there is it is an end of life place, you know, for most of the people there. I mean, there can be other situations, but for most of the people there, it is. And so Edith is, you know, saying it's a death sentence. And then this poor woman, Mary Mcintyre's daughter, who's weeping on the sofa, Laverne comes along, you know, and she takes pity on this woman, and Laverne being the character we met at the start. And the woman asks her, she said, do you think it is? Do you think it's a death sentence? And Laverne kind of thinks, well, kind of, yeah. But then she says, well, life is a death sentence. And it's funny because that becomes that's like a lighthearted thing for Laverne to say. You know, it's an easing of the pain. It's a reassurance, you know, and that, but it's also kind of, you know, say, well, it's pretty nihilistic, but, you know, let's examine the sentence for a while and see where we can find the falsehood in it, you know. So I just think that it's really a matter of recognizing that we're all in the same boat. You know, in a way, it's like, well, what business do you have of feeling sorry for this person? You know, you think you're invulnerable, you know, so that it's everybody's in their own, they're in their own corner of the boat, and they're trying to keep it afloat as long as they can.
Yeah, and I think there's two other things going on too that add to the comedy. One is just this setting. It's kind of like a sitcom setting where when you put a lot of different kinds of people together under one roof and they can't leave, then they're going to have all kinds of like mixed up interactions that are going to be comical at times because they're so different from one another. They don't really want to be there necessarily. And then the other thing is, oh crap, I forgot it. There's a moment where, oh, I know, in terms of like the crime caper aspect of this, there's a bunch of times where, you know, the characters say they're trying to solve the crime, or they're trying to solve the mystery. And sometimes it requires doing things that are not so legal. And some of them are like, what's the difference? Like if I get arrested and get locked up in a place I can't leave, like how that's not different from where I am. And so like that element too, like it kind of creates like the fact that they're in the end of their life in this place where they don't really want to be, also makes the consequences of getting caught in a crime less severe or something, you know, in a comedic kind of way, which I found really, every time that came up, like it was always funny to me.
You know, one elderly woman says to the other elderly woman when they're talking about doing something that is illegal, she said, well, either, you know, we probably won't be arrested, and it takes so long to go to court, you know, we won't be here by the time it gets, you know, on the docket. And even if we were, I think we can both count on very short sentences, you know, because they're both already, one of them's 90 and the other one's in her late 80s. So there's a certain, you know, freedom gained.
Yeah, I love that. Well, so we're getting toward quarter to 8. So I just want to, I haven't yet been reading all the chat stuff, but I would just like to invite everybody in our audience that if you have any questions for Mary Helen, or me, but especially for Mary Helen, if you want to type them into the Q&A section or into the chat space, that would be wonderful. I will feed them to Mary Helen. Oh, I already got a nice one popped up in the Q&A. This is from, are you ready for this, Mary Helen?
I don't know. You'll have to tell me what it is.
It's a good one. This is from Shelley Parcari. I'm not sure how to say the last name.
Hi, Shella. It's Shella.
Shella. I'm sorry. Yes, Shella. She says, or they say, what kind of research, if any, did you do for the virtual reality / gaming portions of the book? Did you yourself play some games to get a feel for that kind of a thrill that a virtual world gives to gamers?
I did. I'm not really a gamer, or I and I'm really still not a gamer, but I enlisted my son-in-law, my grandson, my granddaughter, and they played games with me. So I got into, you learn a lot playing Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, and some old games like The Legend of Zelda, which is like a game from, it's older and more basic and therefore more fun, I think. But so I did that. I did a lot of, for research, I played video games, and they were very patient with me because I'm not very good with the controller, so they had to be very nice. And the other thing I did, actually, I took a computer science course to sort of just have the basic what is made possible by programming, what can you program, and and that kept changing as I wrote the book, because it took me a few years to write the book, and more things came to be easier to do, where you could kind of buy this, in a sense, you're buying a kit with parts already, assembled, so that you don't have to program every blink of the eye. But and I also got a certificate that I'm very proud of in game design. So I took it was like a series of online courses at the community college here, and you got a certificate at the end, and it's a lovely certificate. I framed it.
So if you could do game design?
Well, I did a little bit of game design, but not like the world of Pondside. I'm not at that level, no.
That's great. Thank you. I have another question for Maureen Boyd. Hey, Maureen. She says, hi, Mary Helen. I would love to hear about the challenges of writing multiple point of view. What worked best for you? Was it difficult to transition from one point of view character to another? And anything else that you'd like to say about that, about writing multiple point of view narratives, which was one of my questions too. I didn't ask you all my questions because it was kind of flowing in a natural way, but I had that on my list as well. It's a good question.
Yes. Well, clearly you already know I wanted to do in the book, it couldn't just be like one first person narrator or something. I couldn't accomplish what I was trying to do. So as I said, there are, kind of 5 different point of view characters, some old, some young. And actually moving from one to the other is no problem. You just, it's the beginning of a chapter, or there's been a white space, and the white spaces are very cute. They have little ducks in them when you if you're reading the book, instead of like a little star or design, it's a little pixelated duck. So that's not a problem. But that wrangling those point of view characters and still getting the story told, that was hugely difficult. That was the hardest thing to do about writing this book, and the thing that sometimes made me think it just wasn't going to happen. But that was hard, because it wasn't going to be a Rashomon kind of thing where we see the same event from different perspectives. There's really only one repetition like that from the beginning of the book and at the end. It's not strictly a repetition, but it goes back in time. There's only one of those. This is not a book full of flashbacks or people looking at the same event from different perspectives. So that meant you had to get the story to move along, and the narrators are sort of like they're like runners in a relay race. They've got the baton and they got to pass it to the next person, and they have to keep moving. And now you have a different perspective, so you have to kind of figure out who should come up next. What needs to be revealed, and who's got that information, and that's got to be the person who comes up next. And then other times you're just writing the character, and just whatever they say or do, however the scene develops, that kind of leaves you saddled with another restriction. You've given them this knowledge, or you need them, you want this scene, for gosh sakes, and so you're gonna have to figure out how to get those all in there and still make the story move forward, because it moves forward really, I think, pretty fast.
Yeah, it's super suspenseful and fast moving. And I loved that, actually. I think sometimes, occasionally there are great reasons for a writer to show the same event in multiple points of view, but sure, usually I feel like, a good rule of thumb is that it's usually more effective. I don't know. It's nice when the story just moves forward and they do pass off the baton. And so when the character point of view shifts, something new is happening.
Yeah.
And I love that you did that. The other thing you did that makes it really readable in that sense is that every time we come to a new character, you give us their name, like within the first line or two. You're like, Laverne Slotchick did this,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so we know it's very clear about how we're shifting point of view. And the names themselves are all pretty funny, if you ask me. And so that also, to me, like kind of enhances the comedy, you know, it just reminds us that we're in a bit of a comedy here, or, you know, a sort of a bit of a caper. And to me, like all the names are very funny to me. And, you know, for a Milwaukee person, I have to give you props for naming anybody Laverne.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of, when someone asks me, well, what elements of Milwaukee, you know, if you're being from Milwaukee, are in the novel? And I said, well, the names, there's a lot of Polish names in this, including mine on the cover.
Okay, I have another question. I'm going to skip around a little bit here. Okay. I'm going to go to Susan Murphy, who says, this was also among my questions. This genre is so different from your previous books, right? The mystery kind of genre, which is, it's front and center. Like it gives you a lot of structure in the book. And I was wondering, she says, was this genre freeing or scary? How did you settle on this genre?
Well, I settled on the genre because I knew I had to give my disparate characters in their limiting surroundings a project they could all be invested in. And this is something that everybody could be invested in. And then, of course, the person who was murdered it's also tied up with being shut out of the game. So that's another thing that they would all be invested in. So that's really why the murder mystery kind of genre is why I went there. And I foolishly thought it would be easier to write a sort of classic, you know, mystery thriller than, you know, like a multi-generational family saga or something. Turns out it is not easier. So
that was going to be my question. Like, it feels very fun to read, but I wonder if that makes it fun to write or just harder to write.
Well, you know, there are moments of fun, Valerie, as you know, as we all know, who are writers, but there's also a lot of suffering involved in writing a novel, you know, where, you know, you just, especially with the points of view and the that's why that was the most difficult thing, where, you know, you've got two point of view characters who are need to reveal the same thing, it seems like, you know, and you can't let that happen. You absolutely can't let that happen. And you also have to avoid writing a lot of scenes where people are talking to each other and then the reader is finding things out. You know, you can't let it descend into, you know, well, Mr. Creswick is away right now because actually he just found out that his uncle, you know, has left him a lot of money. And so, you know, you can't have somebody explaining the backstory or whatever. You have to have people, you know, saying things that they need to say at that moment. So I forgot what you asked me, but that's my answer.
That's good. I like that answer. I'm going to combine two questions here just for the sake of time. So one is from Laura Hendry, who's asking about if your view of, hi Laura, and Laura does a lot of wonderful work with the aged and with dementia patients, and so I know her thoughts on this are very you know, very nuanced and meaningful to all of us. And she says, I'd like to hear if your view of the aging process changed from writing characters in the same position as your mother. And I want to combine this with a question from my sister Beth, who said, you know, was Pondside similar or different in terms of the character development when compared to the other characters or novels that you've written? So like coming back to this question of like characterizing, writing characters who are aging, who may suffer from dementia, who bear some kind of, you know, resemblance to things you might have gone through with your own mother or caring for other elderly people. How does that process kind of like shape your writing of characters?
Well, you know, I think one thing that helps, that makes it possible to write characters who appear to be limited, is that novelistic impulse to leap into a person's life. So, that's what you don't want to write about them from, you can't get there if you just talk about them from the outside, which doesn't mean, of course, that every character has to be a point of view character, but there do have to be point of view characters, and you have to get the reader inside of them. Certainly in novels, I think there are probably some very short stories that could stay quite external, or there's like Ernest Hemingway and Hills Like a White Elephants that stays totally external. But how many stories like that do we encounter? But so this impulse to leap into a person's life, those are Zadie Smith's words, but I just described so perfectly. And you just do that. You animate people. I imagine what people are thinking, and it's fiction, so I might not be right. That might not be. When Mcintyre is in the hallway looking at the closed doors of the library, and she hears music from outside, we know from inside the library. Well, we know that that's where she is because Laverne saw her there, But then when we move into Mary Mcintyre, she's at the bottom of the steps of the stairs that go up to the USO. It's 1943, maybe 44, and she's hearing the music up on the dance hall. And getting the courage to go up there and dance. So, but did my mother ever think that exactly? Well, I have no idea, but I do know that experience was part of her life. And so I just put it in her head. It's what it is.
Yeah, I found some of those passages, some of like the most moving and memorable parts of the novel were the times when you went with a character on a bit of a, when they weren't necessarily perceiving things accurately, when they were either kind of going into a sort of fugue state or I don't want to say hallucination, but maybe a little bit towards that, where they were having these delusions, and we went with them. And I found those passages like so moving and so beautifully written, and so like just really transporting. And especially in the context of this like fast-paced comedic caper kind of thing, like it's wild to have both that, and then the more literary kind of perception is altered, the language gets more lyrical and weird, and we're in this strange space, and often in two places at once, right? We can recognize that one character is doing things in the reality that they share, and another character is doing something else on the level of the game, or in the level of their memories, or in the level of their impaired mind. I found those passages really complex to write and really beautifully rendered.
Oh, well, thank you, Valerie. It's one of the ways we escape the nursing home is through a character who is somewhere else, who's like Billy Pilgrim, and Slaughterhouse 5, unstuck in time and place. And so that's one of the ways we get out of, escape the four walls. And and so do they. So does the character. And also, I was also kind of saying that, there's some things in common between dementia of the sort. Now, I'm not talking about, specific, deficits, but where dementia leads a person to be out of touch, with what's going on, right? So they're somewhere, as my thinking. And so where are they? Well, let's kind of imagine where they are. There's a relationship between that and when people are playing a video game, they're somewhere else. Or when you're reading a book, you're somewhere else. You're not present. So in the boring sort of room that you're sitting in, you're somewhere else completely. So I think all of those experiences that are invisible to others, in a sense, that you participate in from the inside, are I don't know, they're very rich, and they're accessible, and there's nothing new under the sun. They're the same. Playing the video game is the same as, building a fort in the backyard, and I don't know, whatever, so again, I don't know if I answered your question, but
you did. No, and that was great.
In that department,
I feel like you also just answered a great question that Scott Korb had. And I think, it's 8 o'clock now, but Scott Korb had asked you to talk more about this blurring between virtual reality and reality. And I feel like you just covered it really well. So I think that's actually a really great area to end on. So I would just love to thank Mary Helen and to thank all of you guys for tuning in and providing these excellent questions and just showing up. It's really lovely to come together virtually and see people from across the country. And I also want to remind you that there's a link probably near the start of the chat, and I bet that Daniel will also put a new link in right now so that people can see it at the bottom of the chat, where if you would like to order a copy of the book from Boswell Books, who has been generous enough to host this wonderful event, and you can even get your copy signed in one way or another, I think, we hope. And so if you're able to do that, that would be wonderful. And but in any case, we're so grateful that you all showed up. And Mary Helen, if you want to have the last word, be my guest.
Well, I also am very grateful. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Valerie, and thank you, everyone who came. I too would encourage you to order the book from Boswell Books. And if people wanted to, could they call and order a book?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, you know,
and we do, yeah, they can, if they don't like that computer thing. You do want to put in the comments if you'd like Mary Helen to actually, if you want a book plate, or if you want to wait, we said a few weeks when someone asked to have Mary Helen sign your actual book or personalize it. You can do that too. And of course, I have to say, just contrary to everybody else, or buy it at your favorite bookstore. So your favorite independent bookstore. I have to put in a good word for all the other wonderful stores that we work with. So.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But here we are now, and we're at Boswell Books, you know, one by the other. So I say, if you heard this at Boswell, buy from Boswell.
Thanks everybody for coming. We wouldn't have bookstore without you. And thank you to Helen Stefaniak and Valerie Laken, and looking forward to your nonfiction book coming.
Yes, I'm sorry, I ran out of time to say it, but in the fall, Mary Helen has a beautiful book of essays coming out. They're short essays. A bunch of them are set in Milwaukee and in Iowa, and they're fantastic. Tell us the title again, Mary Helen.
It's called The 6-Minute Memoir, 55 short essays on life.
And I'm telling you guys, it is amazing. It's really, really good. Just like this novel.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody. Thank you so much for coming.